Okay, so I have 1 minute past the hour, and there are still some people joining, but I don't want to take any time away from your team for this presentation. So welcome everyone to the second ClinGen Summer Workshop. We're really delighted to have the team that's joining us today for their presentation on GenomeConnect and using genomic and health data shared by patients in ClinGen curation efforts. And we have 4 presenters today. We have Maya Chopra, Caitlin Cooney, Jenny Goldstein, and Jules Savat. And so thank you all very much for joining us. And we look forward to your presentation, and I will stop sharing. And Jules, will you just let everyone know if you want questions in the chat, questions as you're talking at the end? What's your preference?
Great question, Meredith. I think because there are 4 of us, welcome you to put questions in the chat as we go, though my hope is we'll have some time for questions at the end, but best laid plans, we'll see how our day goes. So feel free to put them in the chat as we go as well. So as Meredith said, the 4 of us, so myself, Jules Savat, Caitlin Cooney, Maya Chopra, and Jenny Goldstein are really excited to chat with you all today. Caitlin and I will be talking about GenomeConnect and our efforts to collect patient genomic and health data and to share that with databases like ClinVar. Maya and Jenny will talk to you all a little bit about our efforts to work with other groups to increase patient data sharing and how those data can be used for curation efforts. And we do have a spreadsheet of patient data that can be used and explored to see how it could be used in curation efforts that we'll walk through today as well. So before we jump into us doing a lot of talking, telling you about our experiences, our work, we did want to start with just a quick poll, really to get a sense of the audience that we're talking to today. So we have 2 hopefully quick questions of, first, do you participate in ClinGen variant or gene curation expert panels? I believe I have activated the poll, so hopefully if you use the link or you can text to answer. Curious who we're speaking with. I'll give it just another moment. Still see some answers rolling in.
So Jules, you have people who are answering the poll and then people who are putting it in the chat as well.
All is great. Both are really helpful.
Okay.
So thanks. I'll look at the chat as well. All right, so it looks like the bulk of attendees today participate in either or perhaps both the gene and variant curation expert panels, which is wonderful because I hope that today you'll be able to gain a little bit more awareness of how patient data can be used in your efforts. And then if you are not involved in a curation panel, please don't log off, don't go away. I think that the information that we share today could also be useful in just understanding what our efforts for collecting patient data within ClinGen look like. Our second question, if my poll will progress, is just how familiar you are with our collection of patient data within ClinGen. And it doesn't seem like that poll is going to want to work for us. So we'll just leave it at this one of where you were coming from and switch back to slides in the interest of time. Okay. So moving on then, as I said, today, just give you a sense of what we'll talk through. We'll start by exploring how individuals can share their genetic and health data through patient registries. We'll talk a little bit about some of the benefits of patient data sharing. So benefits to our broader understanding of genes and health and variant classification, as well as some benefits back to participants who are engaging in data sharing, and spend a little bit of time on some examples of patients within the registry and some of those benefits. So with that, I'll turn it over to Caitlin, who will get us started with a little bit of an overview of GenomeConnect and the work we're doing.
Thanks, Jules. Okay, so this graphic might be familiar to most of you on the call today. This graphic depicts a few of the key components of ClinGen and how they work together, to support our mission. Today, we'll be focusing on the top portion, so specifically how we engage patients in data sharing and touching on how that data sharing can be used with ClinGen's curation efforts. While laboratories are a vital source of genomic variant data, ClinGen felt and feels strongly that patients can also serve as an important source of genomic and health data. So as a result, in 2014, the ClinGen launched a patient registry called GenomeConnect to empower patients to share their de-identified genetic and health information with publicly available databases. So to date, over 4,800 participants have registered with GenomeConnect, and we have engaged with another 4,000 participants with our data sharing partners. Thanks to these participants, we have been able to share a little over 3,800 variants to ClinVar. GenomeConnect is open to anyone who has had genetic testing, regardless of result or diagnosis. It is not gene or disease condition specific. Participants enroll online. They consent to de-identified data sharing and recontact. They provide their health history through a patient survey, and they upload a copy of their genetic testing report. After consenting, each GenomeConnect participant receives an initial health survey that is used to capture an overview of their health. So an initial survey inquires about general issues across 17 broad categories or body systems. For example, it asks about if they have any issues or health concerns with their eyes, muscles, digestive system. Each question provides examples of issues in that system using patient-friendly language. More specific questions are then asked based on any system or category that the participant has acknowledged an issue with. Currently, we have 8 additional sub-surveys to capture information regarding specific health conditions such as heart defects, arrhythmia, cardiomyopathy, or personal family history of cancer. These sub-surveys were developed in collaboration with some of our expert panel, so thank you to all of you who joined in that collaboration. The health survey is in patient-friendly language, but on the back end, participants' responses are automatically mapped to human phenotype ontology terms. So, for example, if our participant indicates that they have growth differences, they are taken to a page that asks additional questions to better categorize the specific growth differences experienced, including short stature. So we include an explanation of short stature in patient-friendly terms. If that is selected, our data export then maps to this structured HPO term for data sharing. So how do we collect participants' genetic data? Participants share their genetic testing results by uploading a PDF or an image of their results, or providing GenomeConnect with permission to request the records from the laboratory that performed the test, or maybe their ordering provider. Our team then reviews the report. We pull out the pertinent pieces of information, including variant nomenclature, zygosity, inheritance, reporting laboratory classification, what is the reporting laboratory, report date in a structured way. Once the genomic and health information are collected from participants in the registry, their de-identified information is shared with ClinVar. We want to highlight a few features of GenomeConnect's ClinVar submissions. All variants are submitted as a phenotype-only submission. This collection method is reserved for instances when a submitter did not identify or classify the variant, but wishes to share the variant along with additional phenotypic and other case-level details. So GenomeConnect does not classify variants. We include the classification that was on the report, and we indicate the reporting laboratory in our submission. Phenotype-only submissions do not count towards star status. Because we submit the reporting laboratory, this can allow ClinVar users to appreciate when the laboratory may also have submitted to the database. So this is a screenshot of a ClinVar submission. The phenotype-only submission appears at the bottom of the page. The submission from GenomeConnect came from a participant that had testing with GeneDx. 2 lines above the last row, so 2 lines below our submission, you can see the submission from GeneDx. As some labs submit aggregated data, their single submission may not include as many specific details such as inheritance information or detailed phenotypic data. So as shown in this view, in the GenomeConnect submission, we often are able to include additional inheritance information. Additionally, no, you're good. Thank you. Additionally, as you expand the submission, you can view the additional phenotypic information that is collected from the participant through our health surveys. We also have additional details available within the registry, like ages of diagnosis and other details. And we have the ability to recontact participants for additional information over time. A subset of participants share reports that identified a candidate gene, so a variant in a gene that does not have a clearly defined disease-gene relationship. Candidate genes are submitted to a data network called Matchmaker Exchange to try and enable connections with other healthcare providers and laboratories that are exploring that gene-disease relationship in hopes of moving them from being a candidate gene to having a disease association or not being associated with the disease. As you all know, GenomeConnect is one of many patient registries. There are many other gene and condition-specific registries that have been collecting valuable data. In many cases, that data may not be shared publicly. GenomeConnect works with other registries that are engaging patients with the genetic testing or diagnoses to share their genetic and health information with ClinVar. Later in this talk, you'll hear from two groups that GenomeConnect is working with to enable data sharing with ClinVar. That will be the Brain Gene Registry and Association for Creatine Deficiencies.
Thanks for that overview, Caitlin, and walking through a little bit about background about GenomeConnect. We'd like to move on now to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of this type of data sharing and engaging patients in this process. Within our experience, we can see that there are really three main benefits of engaging patients in data sharing. The first is informing understanding of our genes and variants, so genes' relationship to disease and variants' pathogenicity, as well as some benefits back to individual patients, including facilitating genetic result updates and supporting connections with others. And we'll walk through each of these updates individually, starting first with how patient-shared data can inform our understanding. You all are very familiar that there are many questions that still remain regarding gene-disease relationships and variant pathogenicity. Answering these questions is really critical to informing patient care, providing patients the best care possible, and is a part of ClinGen's other work. The curation panels that many of you serve on are working to answer these questions. Patients participating in data sharing can first provide additional information that can be really useful in trying to understand a gene's relationship to disease or a variant's pathogenicity. As Caitlin showed in our ClinVar submission, we're often able to share enhanced phenotypic information. We might have information about inheritance of the variant, segregation of the variant through the family. We also may have information if other variants were identified through testing. And a unique piece of GenomeConnect is that our participants consent to recontact over time, so we can reach out to them if additional information would be needed. Perhaps someone had testing when they were quite young, and phenotypes can show up over time as they age. Maybe now that it's been a few years, we could recontact them and ask for an update regarding their clinical history. In addition, from our experience with GenomeConnect, we've observed that patients can provide novel genomic data, meaning that the variants that we're identifying on their genetic testing report haven't been submitted to ClinVar previously. From our experience of about 3,300 variants summarized on this slide, about 30% are not in ClinVar from the reporting laboratory or another institution, meaning that the patient choosing to share their data is why that variant has been put into the public space. And this can be really useful if you have a gene where we're trying to evaluate a gene-disease relationship, and additional cases may be useful. Also can be useful in terms of variant classification, another case with that variant or perhaps similar variants, which could be useful in those efforts as well. So all in all, patient-provided data can give us more information to inform our curation efforts. They can provide access to unpublished cases, could be really vital for gene-disease relationship and gene curation. They also can offer more detailed information, which could be useful in a variant classification. Perhaps it's additional phenotype information, that ability to recontact, information about inheritance or segregation, and if other variants were identified. To help highlight how patient data could be useful in curation efforts, I'm now going to turn it to my colleagues Maya Chopra and Jenny Goldstein to talk a little bit how they've either used or are thinking about using patient-provided data in their curation efforts. So first, we'll start with Maya, who is an expert on the intellectual disability autism GSET, and who will share first a little bit about GenomeConnect's collaboration with another study, the Brain Gene Registry, and then we'll talk a little bit about how the data from patients have been used in gene curation.
Thank you very much, Jules, and good afternoon, everybody. Just to introduce you to the National Brain Gene Registry, this is an NIH-funded initiative across the IDDRCs. The IDDRCs are Intellectual and Developmental Disability Research Centres. There are 13 centres across the United States who have come together in this highly collaborative initiative in which we work with GenomeConnect to better understand the relationship between rare gene variants and neurodevelopment. So just to walk you through what this registry looks like, so I don't know if Jules can hover over the that first box. What confers eligibility is the presence of a variant in a gene that's been implicated in neurodevelopment that's been confirmed on clinical testing, and we are able to enroll VUS and above. And you'll note that there's no requirement for a particular phenotype in order to be eligible for this study. And this is very deliberate to try and counter what we think maybe is ascertainment bias when we just look at publications to understand what the phenotypic and genotypic spectrum of a disorder is. There's that prone to either severity or towards a phenotypic descriptor, such as an autism clinic framing a gene as being an autism gene. So upon enrollment, the individual co-enrolls into the Brain Gene Registry and GenomeConnect. Through the Brain Gene Registry, they undergo a virtual rapid neurobehavioral assessment. This takes 1 to 2 hours and is both patient survey, but also clinician to patient through a screen to get some standardized measures. And again, counteracting what sometimes we see in published papers where patients or a group of patients are described as having autistic features or learning difficulties. This is a way of getting some standardized information. We're also able to pull their electronic health data, provided they are from one of these 13 institutions. We're not yet able to do that from individuals who enroll through the community. Of course, we also collect their genetic test report. Through GenomeConnect, you've already heard the importance of collecting the genetic test information as well as the health survey. All of that data is available in the Brain Gene Registry, and scientists, collaborators, clinicians, and patient advocacy groups are able to make a request to access that data, de-identified, which is following an approval process. And then importantly, as Jules has highlighted, we're able to have these variants shared on ClinVar, on our own Brain Gene Registry ClinVar page, so that anyone who's interested in a gene or in a variant can actually now reach back to the Brain Gene Registry and not just be able to access the phenotype information from the GenomeConnect health survey, but a standardized assessment and some electronic health record data. And we use all of this information together for rare monogenic neurodevelopmental disease research, but also we're using it in our own ID Autism Gene Curation Expert Panel in the hope that if we can get this model working, this data will be available to other expert panels in the future. Next slide. So the use of the data for gene curation, it expands the scope of genetic evidence. So we have more cases, but it also has the potential to broaden the genotypic and phenotypic spectrum. So for example, if a child had an inherited variant of uncertain significance, we would be able to enroll both the child and the parent for detailed phenotyping to determine is it the case that the parent perhaps has a subclinical neurobehavioral phenotype that wouldn't have been picked up and maybe would have been just marked as being normal or having no phenotype. So next slide. An example of how we use BGR data for gene curation is ASH1L. We curated this within our own ID Autism BGR team in February. And this gene was curated under the entity syndromic complex neurodevelopmental disorder. We noted the published cases. There were 9 de novo heterozygous variants in 9 probands over 6 publications, probably over the last 8 or 9 years. So this is quite typical, as you will know, that a little case series is reported and then a few more, and it takes a few years for enough evidence to reach definitive status, which is what happened. It was described as a disorder characterized by intellectual disability or global developmental delay, some autistic features and variable behavioral issues. Dysmorphology was described, but it was variable. Not all the cases had photos. There was also a description of genitourinary abnormalities and skeletal abnormalities. So that was what we looked at from the published cases. Next slide. We were also able to ascertain cases from the Brain Gene Registry, clinically ascertained probands, both of whom had previously unreported de novo truncating variants, which were dated 2019 and 2020. And of course, had these variants been shared earlier, had they been available, this gene would have reached definitive status earlier. But in addition, we were able to demonstrate some additional features that had not been described in the published papers. Perhaps they were absent or perhaps they were not specifically evaluated, including gait disturbance with ataxia and some interesting neuropsychiatric presentations, including depression, anxiety, and language disorder. So here we demonstrated the use of clinically ascertained variant, expanding the scope and the spectrum of scorable variant level evidence. So I'll hand it back to Jules, and I will put the Brain Gene Registry website in the chat and encourage you all to have a look and to consider making a data access request, a collaboration request, or reaching out with questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. Thanks for sharing a little bit about how the ID Autism GSET has used patient-provided data and giving us another example of how those data can be useful in a curation effort, not just necessarily reaching a particular classification, but in this case, expanding sort of that phenotypic spectrum that we were able to describe. So next, I will turn it over to Jenny Goldstein. So in addition to an example of how patient data can be used in gene curation, Jenny will share a little bit about another collaboration between GenomeConnect and a patient registry called the Association for Creatine Deficiencies, and how data shared by that registry could potentially be used to inform variant curation. So I'll turn it to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Jules, and good afternoon, everybody. So as Jules mentioned, I work with the ClinGen Cerebral Creatine Deficiency Syndrome Variant Curation Expert Panel, or CCDS-VCEP. This panel is co-chaired by Dr. Sadette Andrews from the University of Alberta and myself, and we have an absolutely wonderful group of experts and bi-curators. But today I'm going to talk about the collaboration between our VCEP with GenomeConnect and the Association for Creatine Deficiencies, or ACD. So the ACD is a really amazing patient advocacy organization that provides support and information for patients and their families, as well as promoting research and treatment for these disorders. The ACD partners with NORD to provide this patient-reported registry, and it is patients worldwide can participate if they have one of the 3 CCDS diagnoses, and you'll see these 3 diagnoses listed here. So these conditions all have in common creatine deficiency in the brain, and they're characterized by developmental delay and intellectual disability of varying severity. Patients can also have seizures, movement disorders, and behavioral issues. So for 2 of these conditions, the GAMP deficiency and AGAT deficiency, those bottom 2, those are disorders of creatine synthesis. They're autosomal recessive conditions and they are treatable. And in fact, recently, GAMP deficiency has been added to the RUSP, the newborn screening disorders list in the United States. So that was a really big milestone. And the ACD was very involved in all of that work. The other condition, the creatine transporter deficiency, is encoded by a gene on the X chromosome, SLC6A8, and currently there is no effective treatment for that condition. So the registry will collect information on these patients, including genetic testing information and health information as well. But of note, there's not currently a survey that is collecting the type of information that our expert panel is using for PP4. So this includes data such as biochemical information, also magnetic resonance spectroscopy information, which looks at the level of creatine in the brain, and information like enzyme activity or transporter activity. So what we've been trying to do is to look at ways to prioritize the different variants in the registry so that we can go back to those patients in an efficient way and collect that information. So next slide, please, Jules. So I'm showing here our data sharing workflow. So the Creatine info registry will share the data with GenomeConnect. And then there are also some other sources as well from patients with CCDS that will share data with GenomeConnect. And these may be patients that are simply give their consent to join GenomeConnect and provide their genetic testing report. So what happens then is this information is shared with ClinVar, as Jules mentioned, and then we will also obtain a list, so we can take a look at those. So next slide, please. So this is a summary of our data sharing to date. And Jules, if you can click again, there we go. So on the left, what we have obtained so far from GenomeConnect is a list of variants. As you'll see, 29 variants in SLC6A8 and 13 in GAMT. And the majority of these variants have come through the ACD registry, with just a handful from other sources. And so in order to prioritize which variants could benefit most from additional information in the registry, we have curated all publicly available data for these variants and then applied the ACMG-AMP codes according to our current CCDS VSEP specifications. So you'll see on the right here, for SLC6A8, this is the X-linked creatine transporter gene. There were 8 variants classified as pathogenic and 1 as benign. So those already have their classification in ClinVar. We're not going to think about those anymore. And same for GAMT, 6 pathogenic and 1 benign. So what's of most interest for this project are those variants that are either likely pathogenic or VUS, because potentially with additional information from the registry, we could move those classifications up to pathogenic for the likely path, or maybe likely path or pathogenic for the VUS. So what we've done then is to try and prioritize these variants to see which are the most likely to benefit from that data. So if you can please advance next slide. So much. So these are some of the variants that we have prioritized so far. So as you'll notice, for the top 4 variants in SLC6A8, 4 of these are loss of function variants. They're loss of function based on meeting PVS1 at the very strong strength and also PM2 supporting. And based on those codes, they're meeting likely pathogenic. You'll also notice that 3 of those only have a CAID, which means they're not in ClinVar yet. So we feel like these are really pretty low-hanging fruit. If we simply had just some additional evidence, just saying, yes, we found this in a person who has biochemical evidence of CCDS, for example, we'd be able to apply PP4 and then bump these up to pathogenic. So that's a pretty low-hanging fruit. There are some others as well that certainly could benefit from additional information too, as shown here. So what I'm going to do next is just present a couple of different variants that we have prioritized and are hoping to get patient information on, just to illustrate how this may work. Of note, these are just hypothetical cases. We haven't gotten the data yet. This is the stage we're at right now, but just to show how this information could be helpful. Thanks, Jules. So this is the first variant. This is in the GAMT gene for guanidinoacetate methyltransferase deficiency. Excuse me, published information set to likely pathogenic. I've shown the codes that are currently applied there in the bottom, but in a hypothetical scenario, we can now apply PP3 moderate actually based on the new Revel data. And then if we had one additional case with sufficient biochemical MRS or enzyme activity to apply PP4 at the strong level, which we can actually do in our expert panel, that classification would be upgraded to pathogenic. So really just a small amount of information, just one more case with that information would allow us to upgrade the classification of this variant. And I'd like to thank Emily Grootman for curating this one. And then if you could advance the slides, please, thanks. So this is another example. This is in the X-linked creatine transporter gene, SLC6A8. And you'll see at the current time, this variant is classified as uncertain significance. Current codes applied are shown there. And again, we would simply need one more case with sufficient biochemical MRS or transporter activity to apply PP4 strong, and that could be then upgraded to likely pathogenic. So again, just the presence of one more case would allow this VUS to be resolved to likely path. So really helpful, I think, to have this information. But just a few considerations just to finish up for use of the registry data. Of course, GenomeConnect always requires appropriate consent, and likewise for the Creatine, the ACD registry. And this group is very, very careful about making sure that they keep in contact with their IRB just to make sure everything is done appropriately in terms of data sharing. And in fact, just a little note about that, countries that are governed by the GDPR regulations for data privacy, we don't currently have that data, but the ACD is looking into that with GenomeConnect regarding the best ways to share that data if possible. Also avoiding double counting. I think this is something that we always think about with variant interpretation, whether we're seeing patients in the literature or elsewhere. But one possibility is to survey participants of the ACD to ask if they know if their case has been published. They may or may not have that information. So that's one possibility. But just noting that even if an individual's case has been published, there may still be additional data that could be helpful to us in the registry, including, as mentioned, the PP4 data, but also things like other genetic testing information, like testing of the parents to see if variants are in trans for the recessive disorders or de novo for the X-linked disorder. So that's everything I have, but I really just want to thank everyone in our expert panel, Jules, and also Heidi Wallace, who is the president of the ACD and is also a member of our expert panel, and also Emily Reibhard, who is here on the call and has had a lot of input in this project as well. So thank you for that.
Thanks for that, Jenny. Really appreciate both Jenny and Maya giving us a little bit of a flavor of how patient data can be used for curation efforts. In Maya's case, already has been used for that ASH1L curation. And then Jenny, some work that we're hoping to do with getting some more biochemical evidence so that hopefully these patients can be used for those variant curations. So we'll circle back to how data can be used in curation efforts at the end and share, I said a couple of times, a spreadsheet where you can start to explore some of the data that we have from consented participants. But before we do that, I also want to talk a little bit about some benefits back to participants. So of course, getting more information out there in the public space can be useful to inform our understanding, but there are a couple of benefits back to participants that I'd like to talk through. The first dovetails nicely from a question that came into the chat about what happens if the reporting lab has reclassified the variant. And that's through GenomeConnect and the work that we're doing. We do enable patients to receive updates about their genetic test results. So I think, as many of you know and recognize, the clinical laboratory and healthcare providers' duty to reassess genomic results and recontact patients really has been the subject of ongoing discussion. There's no clear legal duty to recontact that's been established, but there's consensus that recontacting in the case of a variant reclassification or an upgraded gene-disease relationship, that's beneficial and that most patients want that type of recontact. Lab and healthcare providers' reassessment of variants and their recontact practices really vary, and there are barriers to recontact, including limited resources, outdated contact information. So under current circumstances, the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics and the European Society of Human Genetics have suggested that this is really a shared responsibility that includes laboratories, clinicians, and patients, really trying to address potential barriers and to try and ensure that patients are receiving up-to-date information. Early on in GenomeConnect's data sharing, we recognized that the registry might identify cases where a participant's report is out of date compared to the current knowledge base, and that the registry could provide an additional means for patients to engage in the recontacting process. For instance, through the data that we share with ClinVar, we might identify that the participant's genetic report is out of date compared to that clinical lab's current classification. Maybe it was in 2015 they received their report and it said VUS. That lab now thinks it's pathogenic. It also might conflict with a VSEP classification. Maybe they have a VUS on their report, but the VSEP has reviewed that variant and classifies it differently. Through our submission to Matchmaker Exchange, that data network that Caitlin outlined, as well as our evaluation of GSET classifications, we might also learn that a gene that was reported out as a candidate gene now has a more clear gene-disease relationship. In some cases, the lab, their clinic for that participant may have already informed them of this updated information, but it might not always make its way back to the patient, the family. Because of that, GenomeConnect created a process to provide participants the option to receive information regarding updates to their genetic test results. This was a process that was based on a survey of our participants at the time. We asked them if they'd want to receive updates from the registry, the type of updates they might want to learn from us, just those that are medically significant or all updates, and if they'd want a choice in receiving updates so that they could change over time, or if it should just be a blanket part of the consent. Based on their survey responses, we created a process where upon enrollment, participants choose whether or not they'd like to receive updates from us. They can change that preference at any time. And we provide any and all updates back to participants. So things that are medically significant or potentially medically significant, like an upgrade from VUS to pathogenic, as well as changes in classification that might be unlikely to impact care, perhaps a shift from likely pathogenic to pathogenic. To date, 98% of our participants have opted to receive updates from us, and we've shared over 180 updates back with our participants. When we share a potential update back with a participant, we really just use it as an alert saying there may be updated information around this gene or this variant. If you've received a more recent report, you already might be aware of it, and we encourage them to connect with their healthcare provider or a genetics provider in their area. And we encourage them to request an updated report and share that back with GenomeConnect so we can update our ClinVar submission. I wanted to provide an example of how this had worked in the past, and in fact, an example of when a gene curation expert panel allowed us to give an update back to one of our participants. So in this case example, we had a participant who had exome sequencing in 2017 as a child. She had a history of joint hypermobility, hypotonia, and some neurodevelopmental diagnoses that were reported. A de novo TAOK1 variant was reported out. It was reported as a variant of uncertain significance because this gene was a gene of uncertain significance at the time. We submitted this gene to GeneMatcher, one of the connected nodes of Matchmaker Exchange, after the family enrolled in 2019. And via that submission, we learned that there had been a few cases of individuals with TAOK1 variants reported in the literature very recently. We matched with the first author of that paper via GeneMatcher. We reached out to the reporting lab to ask if this would shift the gene-disease relationship for this gene, if this would be an update that we would share back with our participant. And unfortunately, they said not quite enough cases would remain a gene of uncertain significance. Notably, at the time, this gene hadn't been curated by one of the gene curation expert panels within ClinGen, but I'm happy to say shortly thereafter, it was curated. It was curated, and in the interim, a few additional cases had been found in the literature, and that really allowed the GSET to classify the gene as definitive for syndromic intellectual disability, noting that other individuals have a spectrum of neurodevelopmental disorders and have other features like joint hypermobility. At that point, we recontacted the reporting laboratory again. And at that point, they said, this is enough information to update this gene-disease relationship. We will reclassify this variant, reissue a report. And we also, as GenomeConnect, recontacted the participant, informing them of the potential update at that time. So I think this really highlights a few things. First, that the registry can provide updates back to participants, and also can sort of be a conduit between the curation efforts and getting these updates back to our participants as well, and highlights a direct benefit of the curation efforts. I don't think I have to tell you all that they're impacting patient care, patient results, but this is a nice example of that, I think. And then finally, GenomeConnect does enable connections with other individuals for our participants. So first, the registry can enable connections with researchers or clinicians who might have an interest in a particular gene or variant. We've had a number of instances where a researcher might contact us and say, I'm interested in a natural history study around gene XYZ. We have an IRB approval in our recruiting. Do you have any participants that you could reach out to? We have that ability to recontact our participants and as such can tell them about additional research opportunities, really putting the power in their hands to choose whether or not to reach out and participate in that additional work. Additionally, participants through GenomeConnect can match with one another based on gene, disease, or geographic location. As we all know, many conditions may be rare. Patients might have the experience being told that they're the first patient their genetic counselor or geneticist has seen with that particular variant gene condition. And some groups, some genes have really robust advocacy organizations like Association for Creatine Deficiencies, but others may not. And the registry can enable individuals to connect with one another to enable that exchange of informational support, emotional support. And for one of the other questions in the chat, for participants who have negative results, these can be some of the other benefits that they might be able to take advantage of. If there's a research study that might apply to them, we can let them know about it. They can connect with others with similar diagnoses. And of course, we've engaged with them should they have additional testing in the future that may identify a variant of interest. So how can you all get involved? What might you need to know after today? So the first, I would ask that you work with us to expand patient data sharing. If you work with patients, inform them of opportunities to share data. That might be GenomeConnect, that might be the Brain Gene Registry or Association for Creatine Deficiencies, or one of the other 7 groups that we work with to share data. Encourage them to share their information if that's something they're interested in. We do have wording about GenomeConnect that can be incorporated into laboratory reports. And laboratories are a really large source of referrals for us. About a quarter of our participants hear about us from wording right on their laboratory report. So we ask if you work for a laboratory to perhaps consider that. If you work with a patient registry that's collecting perhaps health data, genetic data, but isn't sharing it, feel free to connect us with that registry. We, as Caitlin mentioned, as Maya and Jenny both showed in their examples, work with other groups to share data with ClinVar. GenomeConnect's not intended to be the only registry. We want to help as much information get out there into the public space so that it can be used for curation and other efforts. Additionally, we encourage you to use the participant data to inform our understanding of genes, variants, and health. Variant information from GenomeConnect participants and the other registries that we work with is submitted to ClinVar periodically. And I'll show you how you can identify those submissions on the next slide. We have information regarding the variant and phenotype in the submission, as Caitlin so beautifully outlined, but we also welcome additional questions should you have them. We might have additional information available in the registry. Again, we have the ability to recontact participants as well. So first, you can see the information that we've submitted to ClinVar by going to the ClinVar submitter list. Any submission that we facilitated has GenomeConnect in the name. So if it's from our GenomeConnect registry, called GenomeConnect, if it's from another registry we work with, has their name as well as GenomeConnect. So it can help you filter through where are these patient-provided data. You might also come across it on an individual variant record. So that's the clue that it's from one of the registries that we work with if it has GenomeConnect in the name. Additionally, for today, we've prepared a spreadsheet of the current data we have within GenomeConnect and from consented participants in other registries, really just to explore it and to hopefully encourage you all to use it, think about using it in your curation efforts. So I will go ahead and say a little bit about the spreadsheet and then I'll flip to it. And Caitlin, if you could put the link in the chat, that would be wonderful. So the Google Doc that we've prepared has much of the details that we submit to ClinVar, but just allows you to perhaps filter, take a look, play with it a little bit. So it has information about the gene, the variant information, inheritance if we have it, those HPO terms from the participant completed health survey, age that the individual was at testing, zygosity, the type of testing that was done, the report date, reporting laboratory, and reporting laboratory classification. So some details that we have within GenomeConnect. To help make it more user-friendly, we've also added whether it's a VSEP gene of interest. I will acknowledge I was working off of the best list I had, so if I've missed a VSEP, apologies there. But you can filter to see if there's a VSEP that has tagged that gene as being of interest. And then we also have the GSET curations within the spreadsheet as well. So I'll toggle over to the spreadsheet. Oh, and it's going to need to refresh, so apologies for that. But you can see some of that information here. So we have a ID, so we can, if you reach out with questions, this is the ID we submit to ClinVar, does not correspond directly to our participant record, has variant information, both sequence variants, and we do have some CNVs of interest, condition that the variant was reported against based on the report, and then some of those additional details that I talked through. Over here in yellow is the VSEP, if it's been marked as a gene of interest, and then from there, those gene curations. In instances where there are multiple curations, you'll see they're all listed. So the number of curations is listed and then goes out from there. So I wanted to think about a few examples of how groups might use this spreadsheet for their work. And so I have a real and then a hypothetical example to walk through as well. So we recently had the hearing loss GSET reach out because they were preparing a manuscript summarizing their efforts. And as part of that, wanted to look at GenomeConnect data for any cases with variants in genes that they had curated as moderate or limited. Essentially, any additional cases that they might be able to use in their curation. We did this for them at the time, but now that we have this spreadsheet, they could filter based on the GSET and based on the curation classification to whittle it down to potentially variants of interest. And that's what I've just done on this view here. And from that, the hearing loss GSET said those, oh, of course it's gonna not cooperate, but those listed in gray were ones that they'd want to think about a little bit more for their work. So maybe need to dig in a little bit more to zygosity, inheritance, specific features of those cases, but are ones that they might be able to consider in thinking about their curation. And I best laid plans, we'll leave it at that for this one. So an example of how a GSET might use this spreadsheet is really filtering for genes where they already have curated, where perhaps that gene hasn't reached strong or definitive. And then from there, any cases that might be of interest that they could use or might need more information around. And then if they're about to curate a gene, could do the same, filter for that gene and see, are there any particular cases that might be of interest? Now, a hypothetical variant curation example I'll turn to. So if a VSEP is looking to classify maybe a multiple submitter VUS in ClinVar or a variant that's conflicting in ClinVar, they might just go to ClinVar and see, are there any GenomeConnect submissions for that particular variant? But they also could come to the spreadsheet and filter for that particular gene, see what variants we have. Perhaps it's not the variant they're curating, but maybe it's at the same amino acid. Or perhaps we do have a case that we haven't submitted to ClinVar just yet, since our submissions are periodic. One example of this is hypothetical, but perhaps the FBN1 VSEP was taking a look at this variant, see that it's conflicting with 6 VUS submitters and 1 pathogenic in ClinVar. And in doing so, scroll down to see a GenomeConnect submission, again, at the bottom of the page where those phenotyping only submissions are with that GenomeConnect name. They see there are some features like joint hypermobility listed, and they also note that the variant was found to be maternally inherited. So this could be a case that maybe this isn't anything that they could use, or maybe it's one where they might want to reach out to the GenomeConnect team to hear a little bit more about any phenotypes in that mother that we know of. Are we able to recontact her? Could you tell us more about the specific joint hypermobility or other features? So an example of how VSEP might find our information on ClinVar, or they could go to that same spreadsheet we've shared and do some filtering to see what might be useful. So with that, I just want to summarize. First, I hope you've been able to appreciate this afternoon that GenomeConnect and other patient registries are offering a structured way for patients to share their genetic and phenotypic information, and that data sharing can be useful to ClinGen's gene and variant curation efforts. In particular, patients are providing novel genomic data, additional case level details that we hope can be useful to you all. In addition, I hope that you've been able to appreciate that there are some benefits back to the individual patients who are engaging in data sharing, including that ability to receive updates about results, learn about additional research, and connect with others. I think we have a bit of time for questions, at least that's my hope. With that, I want to acknowledge the other individuals that make GenomeConnect and our data sharing from other registries possible. I want to thank Maya and Jenny for sharing their experiences working with other groups that we're also engaging with to share data, the Brain Gene Registry and Association for Creatine Deficiencies. And I want to thank you both for also sharing your experience and appreciate Caitlin telling us an overview of GenomeConnect this afternoon. So with that, I think I will shift over just to the spreadsheet to leave that up and welcome other questions, comments from my co-presenters, or if others on the call have questions. I do see some others in the chat maybe that we haven't gotten to as well.
Julian, can I go back to my early question? I think got lost maybe.
Yeah.
If someone had, this came up because we're analyzing some likely benign variants. Those won't be on the report. But these turn out, at least in a few cases, be patients with really classic phenotypes. So if you have a negative report, can you join GenomeConnect?
You can. So any individual with genetic testing is welcome to enroll. I think your question earlier, Sharon, was if we shared anything with ClinVar based on that negative report. And because of the nature of ClinVar submissions, we're not able to share anything. We don't have a variant to share with ClinVar. So not submitting anything as a phenotyping only submission, but we do welcome them to enroll. And in particular, because they can take advantage, our hope is of some of those other benefits around additional research connection with others. And then we've connected with them if they have additional testing in the future, which we've certainly seen for some of our participants. We do also have some, I know that it has shifted over time with laboratories and what they will report out, but some participants who have likely benign variants, and those are things that we would submit to ClinVar if they are on the report. I hope that answers your question. Happy to expand.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay. Some of the other questions I see in the chat is, I think there are a couple of questions around AI, and if we're integrating AI, how we're using AI. Right now, our data collection and data sharing process is manual in that we have genetic counselors and genetic counseling assistants reviewing reports, collecting information, and then formatting it for ClinVar submission. Though I think a couple of you raised good questions of perhaps in the future, AI could be a part of that. So nothing that we're doing right now, but something that could be considered. We also have some questions about if there's been a connection between GenomeConnect and the UDN. We have had some conversations with UDN many years ago, welcome individuals who receive variants through UDN to enroll in GenomeConnect. And we also have connected with the UDN through some of our gene matcher submissions. So definitely some interaction with them there. I think with mutual goals of better understanding and providing diagnoses to participants. Scrolling through, I see a comment about CNVs, and I'd like to highlight that we do have CNVs. I think I'm showing one on my screen now, hopefully. We do have CNVs from participants, so not just sequence variants, but structural variants as well. And then I see a question about comparison of Gene Matcher and GenomeConnect. And if we could talk a little bit more about those. So Gene Matcher is one of the connected nodes of Matchmaker Exchange. And really the goal is to enable connections between individuals with patients, participants with variants in the same gene, in the hopes, I think, of moving a gene that might be a gene of uncertain significance to one that has a association with Mendelian disease or not. So that's the real goal of Gene Matcher. GenomeConnect is a little bit different in that it's a patient-facing registry. We do share data with Gene Matcher if we have participants with genes of uncertain significance, but we also share with ClinVar and have some of those other benefits as well. So mutually aligned in that trying to increase our understanding, but a little different use cases and how data are collected and shared. All right, I think I've exhausted the ones in the chat. Maya, Jenny, Caitlin, have I missed any?
Yes, I have a question, Jules, about the spreadsheet. How often do you plan to update this? And is it possible to find a link on a web page somewhere?
Those are great questions, Jenny. So I don't know that we've made concrete plans on updating or where it will live. I think today we really wanted to put it out there and maybe get feedback from folks, see if individuals are using it and kind of iterate from there. Historically, we relied on our ClinVar submissions to say, use this data for a curation, but we just want to make it a little bit more accessible, easy to use. And I think that's why we've prepared this spreadsheet today for individuals on the call and beyond. But certainly should explore those things, and something that our team, I think, will need to talk a little bit more about. Great questions.
Jules, can I ask one question that we often get is, how long does it take a participant to complete the enrollment and the health survey, and whether it's available in other languages?
Thanks for those questions, Maya. I'll start with the latter half, other languages. So GenomeConnect has been translated into Spanish, so available both in individuals who can read and understand English or Spanish. The enrollment is variable, I will say, because the surveys have branching logic. It really depends on how much a person ascribes yes to in terms of their health concerns, health issues. I think I've had people tell me it takes less than 10 minutes, and then I've had people tell me that it's taken them more than an hour. So I think it has been variable depending on how much people say yes to, how much detail maybe they give us in some free text responses. So it depends, I think, on the individual. But it's something people can come back to, can stop and start. I think the most important pieces are that consent, the health survey, and uploading a genetic test report, but things they can update over time. Thanks for that, Maya. Other questions this afternoon? Thanks for the suggestion about other languages. We have started with Spanish, but have kept it open of seeing when we translated into Spanish, I should say, we also added a question around what is for individuals perhaps enrolling in English, what other language would they like to see? And are kind of collating what other languages are we hearing from participants would be useful in their use of the registry. So definitely something that we're keeping tabs on for future accessibility efforts. And I see a question in the chat about efforts to consolidate patient data in one site. I really think that's why we try to submit to ClinVar, is to get it all into that database that are being used by labs, clinicians, to put it into one place. So while there is this spreadsheet, we do also submit to ClinVar for that exact effort of putting it in the place that is being used by lots of folks.
So Jules, we're coming to the end of the hour, but people seem to still have questions for you. So do you mind putting your email in the chat, or anyone from the panel, so that people can ask you their questions or info@genomeconnect.org, so that people that still have questions coming to mind can still get in touch with you, because these are all good questions. We have just run out of time. So thank you all very much, this team. And before we sign off, I just want to give everyone a PSA that there is no public service announcement. There is no consortium call in August, because it's ClinGen meeting 3 weeks. So if you have a call on your calendar on the 3rd Friday, you can take that off, and we will reconvene in September. We have our 3rd workshop series in the series on September 15th, and that will be Stephen Harrison and Les Biesecker talking about version 4 of the variant interpretation guidelines. So thanks again to the team that presented today. We really appreciate it. And please be in touch with the GenomeConnect team if you have other questions that we didn't have time for today. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.